This is a big hat. Looks pretty good, doesn't it? Alright, so how is it going today? I am 20 Book Challenge Man, aka Where's a Robe to Make a Review. So today we're doing the Five Love Languages by Gary Chapman. So I've already completely done this review, but it somehow got deleted off of my computer. So even though I've listened to this book a third time by now, I will probably be going quickly through the chapters because I feel like I don't have to go into as much detail as as I would if like it was my first time reading. It's just I want to get through it relatively quickly enough to where I can then get on to my interpretations and stuff. Yeah. The book starts off by setting the ground rules as to what the five love languages is. It sets the distinction between the falling in love experience and working for the love that you're seeking for, which is the five love languages. And that goes right into the first chapter, which is about the falling in love experience. It starts off with an example of a lady that is 36 and is yet to be married. She usually comes into his office and cries for hours about how she can't seem to find the right man for her. But this time around, Gary expects her to come in and weep her eyes out over some sort of tragedy that happened since she came in almost uninvited. But instead, she was skipping down the halls of his office. And when they began talking, she says, "I'm getting married." "Well, congratulations. How long have you guys been together?" "3 weeks." He is thinking to himself, well, that seems like a pretty short time. But she continues, going, I know it sounds crazy, but I know he's the one for me. When we had our first meal together, we just knew immediately that we were meant for each other. A week in, he asked me if I would marry him, and I said yes. I know that he is the perfect one for me. And she, in her mind, he was perfect. But what she was failing to realize is that he has had two failed marriages before her. He has children between those two, and he is seemingly unable to keep a consistent job. But in her mind, he is the most perfect man she has ever seen. And this is the descriptor of the falling in love experience. And essentially, what it is a chemical reaction in the brain that the book and Gary sort of describes as what is the necessity to get the basic necessities of essentially like human surviving and you know what to actually happen. But it only lasts about 2 years. And essentially, once you come off the high clouds of feeling like your significant other is the perfect one for you, you hit the earth again and you begin seeing faults in them. I think he spends a long time talking about how real love is getting annoyed by foggy stains in the mirror caused by the other person, laundry being left around, all these petty things, because those are the things that once you get down from that high, you begin noticing all the time. So the next chapter is going to start off the actual five love languages, and we're going to start with words of affirmation. So it starts with this sort of little story of a couple that is having extreme marital issues. And something I'll begin mentioning that is brought up multiple times in the book is the phrase the love tank. And it is essentially a comparison to a gas tank in a car. So if it's on E, if you have no love in the tank, then you feel like you are receiving nothing from your partner and you'll probably begin resenting them or some other extremely negative emotion. And this couple was essentially at that point. But he sort of dug into uh, the husband's what worried him and what made him feel unloved. He talked about how he has spent years he has not missed a day of work in 12 years. He has spent so long working his way up the corporate ladder to try and get them in the best financial place possible. And he just doesn't understand why such degrading terms and words are coming from her, excuse me. And so he essentially comes up with this solution to write a list of positive things you appreciate about one another. And they both rate 10. And every week, you're going to say one of them to your significant other, and they are going to reciprocate it. Then you will spend that week focusing on whatever you said to them. And he contacts them back in 2 months to see how it's gone, and he seems like his love tank is full. He feels like he is finally getting the love from her that he's needed this entire time. And we're going to come back to that in just a moment. So, the idea behind words of affirmation is that our words have so much weight and poignancy behind them. And there are people that will hear something from you and it'll mean quite a bit to them. Then there are others that it's just makes the world to them when you say something kind to them, or anything that lets them know that you are willing to verbally say it to them or about them. A good example of how to make your partner feel more loved that the book gives is saying kind things about them behind, even though they're not around, say to other coworkers or people that are friends. So once word gets back around to them, you get even more credit. Now, going back to the story at hand, he talks to them separately. As I already said, the man feels very loved, but Betty Joe does not. She's like, I mean, the comments are nice, but he doesn't ever spend time with me. It feels like he's always gone at work. It's like I don't even know him. And this is the time that Dr. Gary Chapman realizes that he misdiagnosed, not thinking of what Betty Joe's primary love language was. While her husband's was words of affirmation, her primary love language is the next love language we'll go over, which is quality time. What he does is he re-diagnoses to try and help her. So he speaks to her husband again, and this time he says she's going to make a list of things that she, over the past couple years, has asked for them to go do or for him to do. And through this, he's going to, every week or every month, he is going to do one of those things on the list because her primary love language is quality time. That is what she needs of him. And he says something on the lines of, but I'm always so busy. I'm trying to make sure that I secure the best future for us. But Dr. Gary Chapman says, then you must make time because, and he sort of withdraws from the story as of right now. And he says, your significant other and their need for your love, if it means that you don't have the time for it currently, you need to make the time because they are worth making the time for. It is so important to them that you are willing to spend that sort of time with them. So, sort of advancing to the end of the story, they he has gone to the top of the ladder because he wants his wife and children to be there at the top with him. And he gets to the top of the corporate ladder, and they are sitting perfectly fine financially, and their love tank have never been so filled. So, another thing it mentions in quality time is there's a difference between sitting and like watching television with your other person and actually spending quality time. Actual quality time involves things like spending 30 minutes after work to just simply sit and look at each other in the eyes and talk about things that worry you, that are important to you, things that were important from your childhood, and essentially engross yourself in your significant other or the person at hand. While if you're just watching television with that other person, yeah, I mean, you're probably going to have a decent time, but your focus is on the television rather than the importance of your spouse. The example that the book uses is the idea of rolling your ball to your son, and the idea is that the importance of that is not in the activity of rolling the ball, but it's instead in the weight of making that personal bond with your son. So it gives sort of a little list of things that you can do to make someone of this love language feel loved. And it does this for every single love language. I'll mention the ones that stuck out to me the most. So for this one, it was giving an example of figuring out not only what your spouse wants to do with you, but actively doing it before they ever even request it. That way, they feel even more like you understand them deeply. So, the next chapter is about gift giving and receiving. He talks about his time that he's spent in the field of archaeology and how he's noticed through every single culture around the world he's gone to, he's realized how essential gift giving and receiving has been to their culture. So he tells a story of him going to an island once and making friends with this young black man of the age of 26. And at some point, he welcomes him to come to his, his personal house. And the young man asks him if he would like juice. And he's like, "Of course, yeah, I'll take juice." And he tells his brother to go get him juice. And what this equates to for them is he goes and gets a green coconut and cuts a triangle into it so he can drink from it. And the importance behind this is not the quality of what he was given, but it's the idea, because like that probably didn't taste very good, but it's the idea that your love for someone is worth more than juice, meaning that of course you will happily receive it, because that is their expression of love for you. And he also later gives him, when he's about to leave the island, a piece of this beautiful driftwood that has been floating around the island for years. And he describes every single time he looks at that, he not only remembers the young man, but the waves and everything that was associated with the image of that island. It also goes into the importance of the ring in a marriage. It's supposed to symbolically represent the purity in a marriage. And when a wife says that she's done, she's screaming at her man because she doesn't feel loved anymore. She throws her rings on the ground and leaves the door, leaves the house, and slams the door behind him. She, wow, I'm just getting everything mixed up right now. He didn't even know how to respond. He didn't pick up the rings for 2 days, and once he did, he cried because the rings are supposed to represent the purity in a relationship like this. And the next story, which is the largest and most telling of these stories, is the story between Jane and Doug. She resents him because they have lived years together and she has felt like he will not spend any sort of time to make her happy. She says he's as predictable as a clock. He is always going on routines. He's always away at work. And when she complains to him about never having anything, she doesn't feel like she's getting anything from him. He's like, "Well, I mean, we're living just as good as any other American family." But going to one of their seminars, Doug realized that he has been abusing her primary love language, which he thought about it and realized that it was gift giving. And I sort of feel like this story's a little intertwined with quality time, but the primary one is definitely gift giving. So what he does is for and she was annoyed as of the seminar because he didn't say a word. She felt like, wow, he hasn't gotten anything out of this. But a little bit later, for a week, he gives her a gift every single day. And she describes between the different days, once he would give her one, it didn't even feel real. It felt like this was some completely different person that she didn't even know. But through his willingness to try and love her the way that means the most to her, she became the happiest wife there ever was. And he routinely gives her gifts now, whether he makes them or he buys them or he finds them when he goes on walks, because he does all three. And another thing that's important that the book brings up after this point is you don't need a gift to be expensive. What is important is how it expresses your love. But if you're somebody that's extremely well off and you do buy something for your significant other, it will not be received with quite as much kindness if you're like a millionaire and you buy her something from the dollar store. That'll send the wrong That'll that'll do it. So yeah, this is definitely a an important chapter because it goes over a lot of like the do's and don'ts for this particular love language, and it goes very in depth with the symbolism behind what it means to love someone. Another thing before I move on is it talks about the gift of self, and this story is about a woman that resents her husband because she feels like he loves softball more than he does her. And the reason she feels this way is because when her, their daughter was born, he essentially stayed for like 20 minutes before he went and played softball again. And on the day of her mother's passing and her funeral, he wasn't around longer than he needed to be. But in his mind, her resentment for him made no sense. He felt like he was doing all the right things, and in terms of those two events that she never let go of, he essentially, in his mind, he was going to the team and talking to them about it because that's what made sense to him. But instead, what she needed was she needed the gift of his physical being there in a time of need, a time of intense importance in her life, in their life. And I got this one mixed up with acts of service for quite a bit of time or quality time, but the idea behind it is that sometimes you actively being there is the gift, and that is what's needed. And this is sort of like a different approach to it for someone, and it's like a different dialect for someone whose primary love language is gift giving and receiving. So the fourth love language is the acts of service. And this chapter starts with an example between a very young couple that he meets at a church. And this one presents him a very special opportunity, which we'll get to later. But essentially, the husband asks, "Is it possible for someone to love each other if they disagree on everything?" And he thought to himself that that sounds like something people would say if that was tied to some form of need, some form of hurt within their relationship. So he started asking a couple questions about what they disagree about. And one of them is that she hates that he goes hunting, but she pipes up saying that he take literally takes days off from work to go hunting, but he never helps me around the house or anything. And also, he says that she wants him to always go with him to uh, Sunday. And then the next thing he says is that she always wants him to go to church on Sunday evenings, which he doesn't really want to do because he's tired and he just wants some time to rest. And she retorts with that she would be okay with that, except she doesn't feel like he ever does anything other than just go fishing and hunting. If he would stop doing that so much, then he would be able to do that sort of something. And also there's one that she says where he gets angry if she spends time with her mom or anywhere outside of the house. And he's like, "No, it's okay, but the house is always in complete disarray. The baby's face is always disgusting." And he says that it's like she's fine with living in filth. So, not prying anymore, he realizes that both of their primary love languages is acts of service. And he asks, before you guys got married, what was it that made you feel loved about one another? And she talks about how he would help her around her house before they were married, that he would help her with school projects she had for like 3 weeks at a time, and saying that he would do all this stuff for her. But once they got married, it was like he stopped doing all this. And to get to the short of it, he was essentially doing what he thought was just normal because he never saw his dad helping clean the baby's diaper or any of this stuff around the house. But he was actually doing less than his dad because his dad would mow the lawn and clean the car. He wasn't even doing that. But this presents him a special sort of situation because this is one of the rare times where two people have the exact same love language, but they are speaking different dialects. Like I mentioned earlier, there are essentially different values someone has within one of the main love languages. So just because they are of the same does not mean that they are completely similar in their wants and needs. So what they do is they write a list of 4 things that they wish the other person would do on a daily basis. And upon writing this list, they will essentially do that something for the other person. And their relationship skyrocketed from there. Another thing to acknowledge is that with the premise of acts of service, even though in modern times the gender roles are sort of breaking down more and more by the decade, it will still, for some of us, make us have to reconsider our feelings on stereotypical gender roles. Because when it comes to having those feelings, a lot of it is stemmed from what our parents did, and usually we pick up on what our parents do. So if your spouse's primary language is acts of service, there's a good chance you'll need to speak to them and speak to yourself about the values you share and what needs to change. So the fifth and final love language is physical touch, and I'm going to make the distinction that the book makes that for men specifically or especially, physical touch does not necessarily mean sexual intercourse. That is a important part of essentially any functioning marriage for the most part. Instead, what it's referring to is things like, giving each other a shoulder massage or just slightly bumping into your particular somebody while you're working on something together. Or if your other person is in need of some love, hold them or hold their hand. And an example that the book gives is that when he is talking to a man about when he's counseling this particular somebody, he's like, "What's your primary love language, do you think?" And he says, "Physical touch," without a doubt. He says it immediately. And Gary Chapman knows that men commonly mistake their primary love language, essentially meaning sex. What this boils down to is he says, "All right, well, you may feel that way, but what's another thing that's important to you?" When she says kind things to me, that also means a lot to me. Well, tell me this. If you were having the intercourse you needed, but she spent the rest of the time berating you with derogatory comments, would the intercourse really still mean that much to you? And he thought about it and goes, "Well, no, I think it would lose all meaning for me." So Gary Chapman goes, "Well, I feel like we just found your new love language. Your correct love language, excuse me." And something that a lot of people say, especially involving this one, is what if it just doesn't come naturally to me? I was never really a toucher as a kid. My parents weren't, and it just doesn't feel right to me. Well, the book just says you have a new language to learn, and you should be pretty optimistic about it. Another thing is when it comes to learning this language, your spouse, the one that you are trying to please with love, is always the best person to ask if the touches you're giving are she's or he is essentially receiving and it is making them happy, because people are going to have parts of them that they really enjoy having touched and parts of them that they don't. But what feels good to you could come off as overly touchy and sort of aggressive to your partner. And the final chapter I'm going to put a bit shorter, quite a bit shorter than it actually is, because it is a very long winded story, but it is called Loving the Unlovely. And the idea behind it is a woman, while he and his wife are walking through the park, seems deep in thought. See, they've had counseling meetings as of not too long ago, she began them. And she goes, "Mr. Gary Chapman, is it possible to love and hate someone at the same time?" And he tells her that he will have to think about that, for that is one of the most complicated and deep questions he has ever had to ponder. And once they see each other in counseling again, she tells him that her husband essentially hates her. She doesn't get anything from him. She feels like all he does is say derogatory things about her. He feels like wants to leave her so badly that he has no emotional connection to her. And essentially, their marriage seems like it's so far gone. And to put a long chapter very short, they go over a very long list of things that she will have to do. And this is essentially an experiment to see if, despite how far gone their relationship and marriage is, if she, with strong enough of an ability to try and love her husband, can try and bring it back. And and they were going to spend a 6 month amount of time trying to do this. And thankfully, it does end up working, and their relationship begins flourishing after a multitude of months. But it really goes to show how dented and damaged a marriage can be and still be recovered. See, I actually, it was this chapter that makes me believe that almost any relationship can be salvaged. It's just a matter of bringing it upon yourself to do that. And with that, there's a Q&A section at the end, but I'm not going to really go over that right now. What I will go over is what I have analyzed and taken away from this book. This book has done me wonders in understanding the people around me better and trying to better communicate to them and do things for them accordingly. People within my household, especially, I've been able to take what I've learned in this book and try to seek and meet their needs the best I can. Also, I'm just so glad that I've been informed on this topic because I've spent quite a long time not really caring like what other people think or whatever, but I've definitely tried making a goal out of that ever since starting the challenge. And this book essentially lays a very solid map or blueprints to what I have to work with. There's always more that people can improve on, and there's certainly more that I can improve on, but I could not have asked for a better way to introduce me into thinking about relationships and people's needs better than I would have figured out on my own, more than likely. And the range of possibility you have when you understand what your other person is, because I'm not in a relationship like that. I've essentially just been applying this to people I live with or I'm around at work, and it still works wonders because while it is aimed at married couples, it doesn't have to apply like that. He also wrote other books, one for like teenagers, for single people, stuff like that. I might read those on my own time, but for the sake of the challenge, I've not read those. And anyway, I've gotten so much from this book. It's really done a great job of laying the blueprints, and I'm really excited to learn more, whether by reading more books or pondering myself. So, with that through and through, I would absolutely give this book a recommendation. This book has changed so many aspects of recent life for me. Um, Being able to essentially see where I can improve on something for other people. Because one of the strongest things I took away from this book is essentially the idea of when someone's bickering at you for something you did or did not do, if you are receptive, you will realize that whatever that might be can be a gateway straight to their heart and doing the most you can for them. And it's just such an important thing for me because it's helped me so much. I would absolutely recommend this book to anybody that feels lost in that field. I would recommend it to people that feel like they're adequate at it. There's always something more that you can learn, and this book does a really great job of everything I've already mentioned. I would rate this a hat out of 10. Okay, actually, I would rate this a definitely read out of 10. Alright, with that, I already know what the next book is, but I'm gonna have to get my hands on it. It's not something I can find for free, but I will be seeing you guys pretty soon. You can. I just realized how far away that is. Um, you can expect me to be working on these a bit faster. I'm doing this new thing. It's not new as a concept, it's new for me, where I set daily and weekly goals, And I always thought it was dumb in school when teachers would say set goals. It was just always something that I thought was dumb. But I'm coming to appreciate how it helps me keep myself on track, because if my upload schedule is not obvious enough, I can be pretty bad about procrastinating. And setting these goals has helped me be a lot more productive the past 2 weeks once I started it than I have been for months. So, yeah, unless I, get hit by a meteor or something, I will be making these more quickly. I have some books I need to read for some friends, so that might slow the process. But yeah, expect something new pretty soon, more or less. So, yeah, thank you for watching. Have a nice day.